Hi everybody, welcome to week 14. This week we're going to be talking about postmodernism, identity and globalization, the shock of the contemporary. As we move farther and farther into the postmodern period, we're going to see an increase in interest in identity as a source and subject of art, as well as an interest in provoking the viewer by making very controversial statements. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Before I do, I want to just say that this week we'll be reading Gompertz chapter 20. I also want you to look at a PDF of an article called The Art World Expands by Craig Robertson. It's a bit long. If you can get through it, that would be great. It gives you a good overview of a lot of the varied interests of artists that emerge in the 90s and 2000s. What I definitely want you to watch with a lot of interest and focus are the three Art21 films this week: John Fedorov, Cy Gao-Quang, and Kara Walker. These are three artists who emerged in the 90s and 2000s, whose portraits, or biographies I should say, are captured along with their artworks in these short Art21 videos. They're really worth seeing. Toward the end of this week, well actually at the end of the week on the 29th, your museum visit papers are due. So there will be a short quiz this week. There won't be a journal or a discussion board. So please work on those papers and get them in by the 29th. I don't like to accept late work, so please get them in. All right, let's talk a little bit about the week. So, boy, it's really interesting. After the 60s and 70s, the art world goes through a period where conceptual art and performance, painting makes a bit of a resurgence. The 80s are a complex time we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but the 90s are a particularly important moment in the history of art because the notion of identity really emerges as a very important aspect of the global art world. So we have artists from countries around the world who are becoming more and more interested in discussing issues of personal identity, especially in the context of globalization. So if you look here, we see this really interesting recreation, photographic recreation of Manet's Olympia. But this time, it's actually created in a studio and photographed by the artist Muramura, who is actually the subjects of the artwork itself. So you see Muramura as the Olympia and as Olympia's servant. This says so much about what postmodernism is. On the one hand, it's a very powerful and heartfelt way of thinking about identity, how one is situated in the world, what one's role is, right? How one fits. And at the same time, it's a kind of ironic statement that looks back at art history and appropriates or grabs. You could almost say appropriation is grabbing at some other thing other than the thing itself, with a little bit of detachment and irony. So we see that quite a bit in the postmodern period. However, as we go on and as you watch these videos, so we have a lecture, Postmodernism and Global Identities, as well as a lecture on postmodernism sensations, you're going to see artists who are particularly varied in their style, in their philosophies, and in the media that they use. However, the one thing that seems to link them is an interest in probing or sort of digging around at their sense of identity as well as the way others perceive them. And you can almost say this is a really important moment in the development of culture where not only artists, but marginalized groups are starting to become more and more interested in promoting their identities. So that encompasses the first video quite a bit. The second video looks a little bit at postmodern architecture and then talks about an exhibition that's centered on what are called the British young artists from Great Britain in the 1990s, who also dealt with some issues of identity, but perhaps were you can almost call them rebels, or in the same way that the abstract expressionists were considered almost like bad boys, right? These artists were considered real rebels, and they created some very controversial statements. For the most part, what I want you to do is be open-minded and try to look at this work, recognize its variety. Your head's going to spin a little bit after watching both these videos, but the idea is that artists are trying to continue to push the ticket, push the idea of what art can be. And they're less invested in authenticity around making groundbreaking kind of formal statements about art, right? They're not so interested in color and composition or the sort of spiritual or transcendental breakthroughs that artists prior to postmodernism were interested in. Instead, they're very interested in how an artwork can provoke a viewer to think hard about identity. And you all have had a pretty good primer in this by looking at works by Yoko Ono, right, or Marina Abramovic. The way that those works, from your journal entries, what you showed me was that those works spoke to you in a certain way, that they made you think about issues like subjection, right, of being made sort of to be submissive, or to subject yourself to other people's power. And so I think many of the artists that follow the performance art of the 60s are also interested in the sort of questions around what it means to be human, but what does it mean to be human in a society that either recognizes your identity or doesn't recognize your identity? So let's go back here. Remember, we're reading the Gompertz. We're also looking at this other PDF, and we're definitely looking at 3 artists from the R21 series. And then you're spending the rest of the week finishing up your papers, which are due next Sunday. And of course, if you have any questions, let me know, specifically about the paper. Here's the link to the Kara Walker video, as well as the 2 other artists from R21. Here's a link to the PDF. There's also a link here to the Sensation exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, which caused quite a stir. You'll see why when you watch the videos. There is a quiz, and then here's more information on the museum visit. So I hope you have a great week, and we're really moving into the home stretch of the class. I wish you the best on the paper this week, and let me know if you have any questions. Have a good weekend.